Princeton Township, and I'm sorry to surprise people with this too. She passed away this morning, and our hearts go out to her family and her friends. And if you can all join me in a moment of silence for Janet. And now please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. We're going to start tonight's meeting with announcements and start on my right with Ms. Niedergang. Any announcements this evening?
Can you come back to me? I have to open my file.
Sure. Ms. Williamson, are you ready? We can start
yes, I
on
have
the
two.
left tonight.
I have two. There will be a check presentation of the Mercer Play Grant this Wednesday at this coming Wednesday at 5 p.m. here in Town Hall at 400 Witherspoon Street. Mercer will be giving us a check that is both large in size and figure. And we'll have some the county executive and our county freeholders there along with some of us. And the second one second announcement is Corner House, the Princeton Alcohol and Drug Alliance, Princeton Health, Princeton Police, and some of our other community partners are coming to do a presentation on teen vaping called What You Need to Know. It is being sponsored by the Governor's Council on Alcoholism and Drug Abuse. All families are encouraged to attend. It's scheduled for Monday, November 25th from 7 to 9 p.m. at Princeton High School's Performing Arts Center. And the presenters will include Dr. Michael Steinberg, who's the director of Rutgers University's Tobacco Dependence Program, and tobacco policy lawyer Kevin Schroth. It will be, of course, followed by a Q&A forum with representatives from our community and from our schools. Thank you.
I do. On Friday, November 8th, the Princeton Civil Rights Commission, in collaboration with the Office of the Attorney General of New Jersey, the Mayor of Princeton, and the Human Services Department, is going to offer a primer on civil rights, the law in New Jersey. A representative of the Attorney General's Office Division on Civil Rights will be conducting a presentation that will be focused on the law against discrimination, the Equal Pay Act, and the New Jersey Family Leave Act. The presentation will also cover types of discrimination, protected classes, and who must be in compliance in the areas of employment, housing, and public accommodation. We have invited community partners, municipal staff, and we're also opening it up to Princeton employers, merchants, and housing providers. If they wish to attend, please reach out to me before November 4th, so in order to register for the session. The second announcement I have is that the Princeton Human Services Department is looking for donors for their annual holiday gift drive. Interested individuals can sign up on the department's website.
Great. Thank you. Ms. Quinn? Mr. Miller? Mr. Cohen?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention something that the Bicycle Advisory Committee has started to plan for. There's a fundraising ride for East Coast Greenway that's planned for May of 2020. And this may sound like a long way ahead to be talking about it, but they're expecting in the neighborhood of 500 bicyclists who are going to be riding from New York to Philadelphia to be stopping overnight in Princeton. And it's a real opportunity to support our merchants by trying to bring those riders into town. They'll be staying overnight either at a hotel on Route 1 or camping out at the Y. So I'd love people to start thinking about ways to build on the opportunity, and let me know if you have any ideas, or the folks who are working with the Economic Development Committee.
I'm ready now, thank you. So just a couple of announcements from the Board of Health. There's an upcoming rabies clinic, Saturday, November 2nd, 9 through 11 a.m. at the Fire Department at 363 Witherspoon Street. And dogs must be on a leash, and cats must be, and this always amuses me to say this, must be in a carrier or in a pillowcase. Just love getting that out. There's also an upcoming flu clinic on Thursday, November 7th at the Princeton Senior Resource Center from 2 to 3 p.m. Thank you.
All right, and I have several announcements. The first is this weekend, Sunday, November 3rd, is Princeton's annual half marathon, and that starts at 7 a.m. So please, if you want to go out, make sure you check about road closures. And it's also the time change that morning, so make sure you have the right 7 a.m. For the race. As hopefully everybody knows by now, Alexander Street will be closed starting Wednesday, November 6th. We've been working with New Jersey Transit and DOT, and I'll cover more of that in reports. We have several council meetings coming up. So first of all, we have 2 budget priority meetings. They're both morning meetings. The first is going to be on October 30th at 8 a.m. and we'll be hearing from department heads from Recreation and Youth and Community Services. And then on November 7th, also at 8 a.m., we'll be having a budget priority meeting with department heads from Police, Emergency Management, and Administration. And then our next council meeting is, instead of a Monday night, is going to be on a Tuesday night. It will be on Tuesday, November 12th, and that's because Monday is Veterans Day. The municipal offices will be closed Monday, November 11th for Veterans Day. There will be a ceremony at 11 a.m. At the All Wars Memorial, and this year's ceremony is going to include a rededication of the bench, and that's been a big project with the local DAR chapter and the Garden Club, and we're very thankful for their work on that. And then finally, there's a couple events happening on Saturday, November 9th. First is at 10 a.m. There's going to be an unveiling of the new mural in the Witherspoon Jackson neighborhood on the wall of Lapita's grocery store. And then there's also going to be the first ever Engage Princeton Volunteer Fair, and that's going to be at the Princeton Public Library between 11 a.m. and 2 p.m. And that will feature a lot of the boards and commissions from the municipalities. So we're encouraging everybody to come to that. Are there any staff announcements? Nope.
Can I add something else? I didn't mention it in the announcements, but for the 7th year in a row, I will be participating in the Princeton Half Marathon. I'm a little bit older than when I first participated, so wish me luck.
So when Leticia says she participates, she runs. I participate by clapping. So we each have a role to play.
And you also do the starter gun.
Yeah, there we go.
Good luck, Council.
Yeah, it's really impressive. And you're not the last one. You're like right in there representing. Okay. We have a proclamation on tonight's agenda, and is there anybody here to collect tonight's proclamation? Okay, so I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it's about Communities of Light, which is something we do every year in support of women's space and drawing attention to the problem of domestic violence, and making sure people know where to go for help and letting people know that there is help out there. So I encourage everybody to read the proclamation online. And now we come to public comment for items that are not already on the agenda. And I'd like to call up Paul Shore. Is Paul, oh, there you go. I'm not sure if your mic's on.
My name is Paul Shore. I live at 299 Hamilton Avenue. And I have one question for the board and one recommendation. The question is, can the floodplain lines be moved without first getting approval from FEMA? Can the floodplain lines be moved without first getting approval from FEMA? And I can explain that. One picture's worth 1,000 words, and I'd be pleased to give this to council if they want to accept it. That's the first question. The recommendation follows from the problem that we've encountered, and the recommendation has to deal with potentially an ordinance related to how floodplains are managed in the borough, in the municipality. First, I wanted to compliment the engineering department, who has, I would have to say, acted extremely professionally, diligently, responsively to all the issues that I continually raise, and I hope to speak with them further as we go along. The drawing that you have, if you have extras, maybe you might pass that to the table below. The drawing is the picture of Harry's Brook between Snowden Lane and Harrison Street. And it's directly taken from the FEMA website, and overlain on top of that are the lots and blocks of the properties that are crossed by the FEMA web line. The top line in reddish color is the elevation of the floodplain boundary as it crosses the lots closest to Hamilton Avenue. The bottom line, the bottom red line, is the other side of the 100-year floodplain, which is on the other side of Harry's Creek, closest to Bainbridge. I don't know, I should stop right there and see, is anybody can, it's a little difficult to read and took a while to put together, and perhaps it's not clear yet. So I'll stop right there and ask if everybody can understand where they are. Maybe a little?
I understand.
I am? Sure. Okay, good. Thank you. The blue line is Harry's Brook. The little blue line at the lower, in the lower portion is Harry's Brook. That's the center line of the stream. And the, I'm not sure what other colors I have. Well, the blue line is highlighted in pink color. Okay. And the black square with the dotted lines is the repositioning of the FEMA floodplain line. This was done in accordance with rules, engineering rules, floodplain rules, method 5 from the Department of Environmental Protection, and it allows the building at 72 Harriet to be reconstructed, and reconstructed in the rules of the floodplain management ordinances and regulations and statutes. Does everybody see 72 Harriet on there? Okay, right. Good. That building had become very difficult to manage. It had a mold problem, mildew problem. It was at a low point, just as I am at 299 Hamilton Avenue, in this whole watershed area. It now was torn down. Its value was decreased from $690,000 to a little over $400,000, and then it was torn down. It's been reconstructed, and that has helped immensely in the mosquito problem, in the drainage problem that we've had in that area for more than 15 years. So I give you that background only because it applies to the situation which we are presently in. All sewage from 299 Hamilton Avenue has to flow by gravity to the Princeton Sewer Operating Committee trunk line, which is parallel and close to Harry's Brook. As everybody, that's not marked on there, but it's very close to where that black dotted line is. And actually it goes from Harrison Street and all the way to Stony Brook Regional Sewage Authority. It's a major trunk line. There's other ways to explain this, but I'll cut to the chase and say that in order to redesign the house and put a new house at 72 Harriet, the engineering firm reestablished what they call the BFE, the blood. I think it's the bank full elevation. I'm not sure if that's the correct name for the acronym. And they did that along the black line that's at the bottom of that square. So basically, they took out the house and the lot, and my lot too, from floodplain jurisdiction. In other words, I purchased floodplain insurance for my basement, for the sewer line, for other things that are actually essential to living in my house. And that was because I was in the floodplain area. By moving the floodplain line, and this is the question I have originally started with, am I now removed from having any floodplain insurance? It would appear to me to be so, but I don't know. That's why I'm asking council and other people here, will I be removed from having floodplain insurance? You don't have to answer right now.
Well, I could say I don't think necessarily we're the ones who can answer that question for you, because I mean, does the municipality, Mark, can you help me out here? Of like who requires the insurance, and
we can identify whether he's in the floodplain, and that will determine whether he needs the insurance or not.
So I would recommend that you come back tomorrow or some other day during the week, and if you go upstairs, does engineering maintain those maps? Who maintains the flood maps?
They're online. You can look
They're
at.
online.
Oh, they're online?
Paul's also been working with Jack West
Okay.
On some other issues, so Jack can follow up.
Okay.
So let me briefly give you my answer. No. The municipal engineer doesn't have priority over the floodplain management line. Even an engineer submitting documentation to the state doesn't have priority over location of the floodplain management line. And it's a simple, I would say, difficult but common sense concept. The floodplain is a water boundary. The water flows downhill. You can't arbitrarily stop the water from flowing where it wants to go. So even though we now have a box, the black dotted line, which changes the location of the floodplain line, it doesn't change the location of where water is going to go. That's the first thing. So I have a problem with that, because not only institutionally do I think we're out of order in terms of getting the floodplain line moved, we have a technical problem, and I'll be addressing that, not here, but later when we meet with Jack West and Mark. And I have to thank those gentlemen for having the patience to meet with me on this issue. The problem also that is common to the properties that you see on this drawing is that there's a clay barrier about 2 feet below the surface, and that clay barrier prevents percolation into the soil. What does that mean? It means that floodwaters will stay in that area. They won't be percolating down into the soil. There's another problem. The Princeton Sewer Operating Committee sewer line has to be there, but it also is I'll call an obstacle to the natural flow of water laterally through the soil above the clay lens.
Okay, you know, I understand this is complicated. It just feels like we're not going to solve it up here tonight. And so my recommendation is you've already been meeting with staff, that you continue to meet with them. And if there's action that council needs to take, it can be brought back here. I'm just worried that this is very specific to.
No, actually, that's the point I'm trying to make.
Okay.
This is not specific. This is probably an issue that faced other places in Princeton who are within this particular type of floodplain boundary. And specifically, it affects the other properties along this side of Harry's Brook. So we're not just talking about 299 Hamilton Avenue, and we're talking about a community issue, because our response to this issue has generated tension
Mayor.
between property owners.
Yeah.
If I could say, thank you, Mr. I know we've had a conversation before. What I might suggest, this is kind of a little more information than what we originally talked about. And I know we have a meeting scheduled this week. So let me sit down, and if there are any other issues that go beyond the specifics of this, we can bring that back to council if there needs to be some type of action. But let me sit down and kind of get more details from Mr. Shore.
Yeah, I agree with that plan, or if it needs to go to the planning board or environmental commission. But I think we just need to sort of sit down and figure out what those issues are and where there might be a municipal role. So thank you for coming and raising the
May I interject
issues.
a little, Mayor? If Mr. Shore, why don't you write out this all, like, offline? I'd be interested in finding out more. I know we don't have time to discuss it now, but if you write out all you're discussing now, and put it into some sort of format that can be read and reference the maps, et cetera, and we can see if it's a broader issue.
I would say, sorry, as a first step, I would say meet with staff.
Right.
And then we can sort of figure out where to go from there.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Is there anybody else who'd like to speak on any issue that's not already on the agenda? Okay. And I do want to thank you for coming. I don't live that far from you, and I know that flooding is an enormous issue in town, and when there's development next to you, it can impact what happens on your own property. So I don't want to dismiss the issue that you're bringing before us. We just have to have a little more specifics so we know how to navigate what you're recommending.
I just want to chime in and say, because I know, Dwayne, I could tell from I feel it's alarming I think it's alarming to all of us, so we'll be waiting to hear.
And I just note that I walked the site with Mr. Shore in May, I think, and the concerns there for the entire area are very real, became very real for me. So I'm hoping that the professionals can bring us a recommendation.
Okay, so we're gonna, if there's no other public comment, we'll move on to reports. And the first report, I'd like to call up Sandy Webb, our CFO, to talk about best practices inventory.
Thank you, Mayor. This is the best practices inventory that we have to bring before council every year. This is the 10th year that we've brought the best practices, and it's changed in the 10 years. We started back just a couple of years ago where there were only 25 questions. Last year, the number went up to 61, and this year there's 84 questions. And we've run the gamut of what the questions, what they were about. Originally, it was mostly about finance-related issues whether we were being, in the state's opinion, having best practices for a host of things, whether our audit was filed on time, whether we're working on shared service agreements with entities, surrounding entities. This year, it actually talked about cyberspace training. It's talked about our personnel manual when we've done updates. At the end of this process that we go through to answer all of these questions, we get points based on whether we answer yes, no, or not applicable. And we have to have 30 points in which to maintain our state aid, or a portion of our last payment of our state aid. Every year we have been more than above what the minimum score was, and I'm glad to repeat again, this year it's the same. So we're going to file this. It has to be filed by Wednesday, unless council has any questions that Mark and I can entertain. It's a little bit different this year. This year they actually had some unscored questions also, and that was for the state's purpose, just to gather information to see whether we needed their assistance in some areas, whether we have a planner on staff. And a lot of these questions weren't answered. There were no points, but we were still required to answer them. So we've gone through this. I've gone through it. Mark has gone through it, and we're pretty comfortable with everything that we've answered on this.
I remember we had talked about scheduling a meeting to make sure that we have all the reports from our authorities. Does that still need to happen, or?
It does, thank you.
Okay.
Yes, it does. Usually we have David Goldfarb comes and talks about Stony Brook, and then we have a rep from the Housing Authority. So if we can get them scheduled, I'll need to include that date in here. So if it's, as long as it's before the end of the year, whenever you can tell me what the date is, that would be helpful.
Okay. And it's just the two, right? It's the sewer authority and the
And
housing
the Housing
authority?
Authority.
Okay.
That's correct.
Okay, great. Are there any other questions for Ms. Webb? Yeah, we'll start with Ms. Krumiller and then Ms. Niedergang.
Well, this might be a really crazy, but I don't see where the answers are. Yes.
Ironically, I just mentioned that to Mark, that I was out on Thursday when they uploaded this, so I went into the website today just before the meeting to print it because I had my copy that had all the answers, and I was a little surprised that there were no answers on there. So I can send the answers out, but we scored at 44.5 points, so we're well above the minimum that was required. So I apologize that the wrong copy went out.
Yeah, that was actually one of my questions as well.
I would imagine.
I think we do that, but I'm not sure about that. It would be helpful to have the answer, so I'm glad.
Yeah, I apologize.
I thought it
out
might be a
that
secret
morning.
code that I wasn't getting.
So thank you so much for this, Sandy. It looks like an incredible amount of work. And since this is my first time going through this, can you give me a little more context into who asks us to do this, and just a little background information?
Sure.
Would be
a lot
and
of
then
what
I
I
had
do is
one specific question.
Okay. A lot of what I do is governed by the Department of Community Affairs, by the Division of Local Government Services, and that's who we're required to do this document by. So a lot of the questions that they've asked in here, especially this year, by far this year, have nothing to do with finance. And so
Right.
I went through a lot of the questions, and Mark and I sat down and went through them because some of it I don't even have any knowledge of. There were a couple I think I even had to hit Deanna with some sewer questions that were on this list as well. So like I mentioned earlier, it's been about 10 years we've been doing it. The first couple years, we just had to prepare the document and file it. We weren't required to come to the governing body to go through it. But I think it's, you should know what I'm answering. So I think it's a great exercise for me to bring this before you. So you can see where we compare, what things that we're able to answer yes or not applicable on, and the things that we have to answer no to because there are things maybe we're not doing that they're recommending that we should do.
Okay, thank you. So in addition to the answers, like one of the questions, I have two questions actually. So one of the questions was on fee schedules and how are we going over them and making sure they meet our revenue expectations and that they're not exceeding the need for which the fees are levied. And so I'd also be interested, if it's not too much trouble, to append that information as well to the report with the answers when it goes out.
Yeah,
that would be of
I can
interest.
mention on the revenues that when we sit down and put the budget together, Mark does require each of the departments to look at their fees and their structure and see how we're marketable to the surrounding communities, whether our fees are too high, whether they're too low. And we usually come in right about the middle. We're not too high, we're not too low, but it is an exercise that the departments do go through every year.
Okay. Yeah. it
And
would
you'll
just
see that at
be-
the beginning of the budget process. We'll provide you any of the changes in the revenues after each department takes a look at it.
Okay, but I'd just be interesting to see, like, sometimes people ask me, oh, I have to do with this, what does that cost? You know, and each individual thing would have to be looked up, but if there's like some compended document that lists all the different fees
It's
that
just the fees themselves.
Yeah, that would be.
There
if-
was something on the website a while ago
We can
that
see if we
had
can
all
get-
the
put
fees,
some-
but,
yeah, put
but we
something
can
together
check.
Okay, and the second smaller question is, it asks something about a SALT charitable fund and whether we were doing that. And my understanding was that kind of didn't go anywhere.
Yeah,
That-
it kind of died. I mean, that was the year, a couple of years ago, when we collected millions of dollars in prepaid taxes because people were trying to get in under the deadline of when they could prepay their taxes and claim them on their personal federal tax filings. The state put together these regs and rules and IRS requirements, and it was incredibly burdensome. Because we had to comply, but then the county had to comply, but they don't collect taxes, and the school had to comply, but they don't collect taxes either. So basically, no one in the state did it. There was one town that had an ordinance scheduled for introduction, and their governing body decided against it. So we've never even gotten that far because there wasn't anyone in the state that was even taking that on.
And there's no guarantee that the IRS will actually accept,
Right, that
accept it.
would it be a significant tax
Right.
savings for our residents?
Right.
Possibly, but a lot of work to get there with maybe no result. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
And ethically debatable.
Yeah, this is a more general question, but I noticed there are quite a few questions that don't have points associated with yes, no, or any of the answers. Is that basically the ones that aren't financial in nature? Or-
When I went back through this tonight in preparation for this, the state, this is the first time that they've had unscored answers. And so for them, it was just to find out additional information. So one of the questions, I think, was whether we had a planner on staff or we have a consultant as a planner. I guess there are towns that do not have a planner or don't have the need for it. So, you know, in my mind, maybe that's gearing them up to ask more specific questions the next round of this.
Yes. So my question was just general, since we don't have the answers here, but I can kind of guess on some of them. The ones that are a no, in the answers, would they is there a description of an answer as to why it's a no and whether there's a plan to improve our score the next time around?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always room for improvement. One of the questions that we had to answer no on, and this is the first time that we had to answer no, was what our ratio of assessed value was. And they don't like to see it dropped below 80%, and ours this year I think was 82.79, something like that. But we have a compliance plan, so my answer to that was no, but it's not like we're not doing anything. We have a compliance plan that, you know, I think you all look at, and it definitely gets approval by the County Board of Taxation every year. So even if we are answering no on that particular one, in my mind, we're still doing something. You know, where, you know, one of the suggestions was then you need to look at a revow or a reassessment, but again, we don't need to do that because we have this compliance plan that we, you know, we take on every year and look at neighborhoods and adjust assessed values, so.
I ask because most questionnaires that we fill out, if it'll say if there's a no on, or you answer yes or you answer no, explain below. And I was wondering if there was an opportunity to do that, to explain why it's a no.
Yeah, if there's, I mean, in almost every one of these, you could put a comment in. That's why if we could, if we did answer no and we didn't get a point for it, I want them to know why
Right.
we answered no. And one of the questions I think that came up was whether we have an ordinance where we have a list of individuals that need, say, emergency snow removal from their property. And so when I talked with the chief, he said, well, they have something that they're doing at the police department, but we have not done an ordinance. So I put that in as my comment. So
Right.
that, again, they don't think that we're not doing anything. You know,
Right.
we're taking a proactive approach to it. Just, we don't have what they want. But maybe our plan works just as well as having an ordinance in place. So,
Okay, thank you.
And that's one of the issues I have personally, and I know a lot of the municipal managers with the best practices. They asked a lot of questions that really just answering no does not mean that you're not doing the best practice. It just means you're not doing what the community affairs wants or thinks is the right practice. So there are a number of questions, and each year we go down to the state and kind of have conversations with them about these issues. And any ones that we've really answered no to, for the most part, they're either something new that we just maybe haven't thought about yet, and we could maybe get points next year for it, or something that we just can't do at this point for some reason, or some logical reason why. But for the most part, we try to answer yes, or if we can change it, we make adjustments to ensure that we can get those points.
I mean, a lot of the unscored questions this time, the Division of Local Government has a new section where they're coming out to communities to help them do debt management or shared services. And some of those we answered yes, and some of those we answered no to, because this is a new unit. You know, we want to kind of see what their approach is. Maybe our approach may be a little bit better than what they're recommending that we do. So it's, you know, it's kind of a, you know, a little bit of growing pains here for this particular year of the best practices.
Just want to ask, just for the sake of the public, you may want to mention what the top score is. I mean, we can, I guess, calculate it from here, but
I think they said that there were 50-some points, and I think we scored around 44 and a half, so we're
right.
doing
So it
pretty
gives
well.
the public a perspective of
Right.
where we are. Thanks.
Great. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. And if we could just have the completed sheet when you get a chance, and maybe we can include it as part of the next agenda packet,
Yeah,
just so the public
absolutely.
gets a chance to see it too. But we don't have to. You don't have to report on it again.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Okay. And there was a mistake on tonight's agenda, so we really want to hear a report on the electric vehicle use policy, but we're going to have to wait until November 12th, which is a Tuesday night. Okay. Okay, well, it might not be on November 12th, then we might have to bump it to, I think the meeting after that is December 2nd. Okay. Okay. Next we have the River Road update, and I want to turn it over to Mr. DeShield.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to provide you a report on an update on the River Road site. As you know, Whitman Associates conducted a preliminary investigation in August of 2019. The investigation included a visual inspection, a geophysical survey, using ground penetrating radar to detect if there are potential subsurface objects or disturbed areas. During their visual inspection, they identified 5 areas of concern. Those included 4 stockpiles of materials, in addition to an asbestos-containing roll-off container. Through the ground penetrating radar, they found no anomalies. The visual inspection also revealed that those large stockpiles of dirt contained man-made source materials. Those materials included construction debris, asphalt millings, gravel, and then light municipal waste. Further observed, they revealed that the asphalt residue throughout the site that was used to laid across the site to support equipment used to dump the material throughout the site. The area of disturbance is estimated to be at a depth in the main soil piles of about 20 to 30 feet, with a total estimated volume of soil in exceedance of 100,000 tons. These materials were in place for many decades. This is evidence as they did their analysis. There were aerials in the 1930s that showed at that time soil disturbances and land clearing was going on in that area. Soil samples were collected and analyzed and assessed if there were any contaminants within the fill material. There were 38 samples that were taken at various depths. This allowed Whitman to characterize the contaminant area both vertically and horizontally. Each contaminant was then compared with the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection standards to determine if they exceeded any of the standards. And now I'm just going to briefly go through the results of those samples, the soil samples. The soil samples results identified the following contaminant, and these contaminants were dispersed on the sites that exceeded the New Jersey soil remediation policies. Those include polyorganic hydrocarbons, or PAHs, and then several metals: manganese, aluminum, beryllium, psyllium, barium, lead, mercury, and chromium. These contaminants are typical in soil throughout the state of New Jersey, and they only exceeded the most stringent residential or non-residential standards. They're also testing for the impact on the groundwater standards. Groundwater standards are designed to prevent future contamination of the groundwater from current soil contaminants or residues of contaminants remaining after a remediation. Whitman's investigation found a small number of samples showing levels of lead and mercury that exceeded the New Jersey impact to groundwater standards. In addition, chromium was detected in every sample. However, further testing indicated that none of the chromium that was of the hexi variant, chromium variant, which is considered more toxic and would have required us to immediately remediate, take remedial actions. And based on their preliminary investigation, Whitman believes that these contaminants remaining on site can be remediated with a combination of hotspot evacuation, literally removing the soil and disposing of it, and securing the remaining soil through establishment of environmental controls. Those are things such as capping to prevent any leaching of the contaminants to the groundwater. Finally, the remediation, this is just the first stage, the preliminary stage. They will definitely have to do additional investigation to determine any next steps. In terms of actions taken in the asbestos site, all of the asbestos-containing material was removed, properly secured and removed from the site. In addition to take extra precautions, there were 4 additional soil samples, surface soil samples taken around the area where the roll-off was located. The laboratory results on those did not detect any asbestos in the ground. I'm going to let Jeff just talk a little bit about the health concerns.
Sure. Thanks, Mark. Based upon the results from Whitman's preliminary site investigation and after discussion with a few Board of Health officers, currently there's no observable immediate health concerns. Health concerns over the site were isolated to the container of non-friable asbestos material, as Administrator DeShield mentioned. The container was properly repackaged and removed, and then further testing around the container was performed and no residual asbestos material or results were found. As Mark mentioned, some soil contamination was found on the site. It's been identified through the soil borings and is being further investigated to make sure no migration of the contaminants have occurred. Based upon the initial readings and observations, off-site contamination risk appears to be low, which will be further backed up by the groundwater sampling. Thank you.
In addition to that, we just wanted to give you an update on our compliance with the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection, municipal staff in Whitman. We've been engaging with the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection Division of Solid Waste staff to resolve all of our violations. NJDEP did issue us a notice of violation for the improper operation of a solid waste facility. In addition, we were issued a penalty to the municipality in the amount of $35,000 for a violation of NJDEP regulations. The municipality immediately petitioned the Division of Solid Waste for a waiver or a reduction in that penalty. We then met with NJDEP. Division Director offered to reduce that penalty to $30,000. The offered reduction reflects a penalty at the minimum of the scale for a violation of the type that we have at our site. Currently, we're awaiting guidance from NJDEP on the next steps for the cleanup. Depending on their direction, the municipality will remove and or maintain the materials at the site with using the environmental controls such as capping. Moving forward, it will be necessary to do additional testing, as I indicated previously, to determine more comprehensively what is on the site so that it can develop an action plan for its removal. In addition to that, municipalities have been working with our insurance carrier concerning the cleanup of the site. We have, as I mentioned before, we have $1 million environmental policy. We have initiated a claim on that policy. We continue to work with the insurance carrier on that. In addition, we have engaged an environmental attorney to assist us with recovering damages from the contractors who illegally dumped on the site. We continue to work with them, with both DEP and with our attorney as we move forward, and I will provide additional. One of the things we also did was we talked to Whitman. One of the areas that we want to continue to move forward with, there are survey work that needs to be done on the wetlands that we'd like Whitman to expand a little bit on his survey work, just to get a better idea on the wetlands outside of the area that's dumped, to have them do that work before we move forward and get any information back from NJDEP.
Okay. Ms. Kremiller?
Thank you so much for that report. Did I hear that the estimated depth was 20 to 30 feet?
Mm-hmm.
But there was also the evidence that went back to 1935. So I didn't really understand what that meant. Like, is the damage that was done in the last recent events, did that go down to 30 feet?
No, 30 feet is the total height of the pile in which the soil pile that's there. What they can determine is it's 30 feet high, and what they've seen is there have been, through the aerials, there have been dumping there since the 30s. They can see that there has been soil disturbances there and dumping. I don't know that we know exactly how much was dumped based on the cases for the prosecutor's office, how much of it is based on that and how much it may have been previous materials being dumped there.
And so we can't really tell. There was all like the bad chemicals, or the chemicals, not necessarily.
No, there's actually metals. There are metals in the soil.
Okay,
And
metals.
those are metals that are kind of in any soil. From my understanding and talking to Whitman, that's just based on dirt being moved from other locations to there, and probably combining that dirt is the reason why you'll see exceedings in the metals in that area. And that's what you have there. You have metals throughout it, and then you have the PAHs, which are really the asphalt millings, which was used to actually create the roadway to allow them to continue.
Right. So, but whatever material that requires capping or excavating quickly or whatever that was, or flash, I forget what the word was, moving out, digging out and taking away. So there's some stuff that's determined that we have to either cap it or take it away. And does that include stuff going in the 30 feet, or is it only the stuff that was recent?
That's one of the things where we're waiting for guidance from NJDEP.
Okay.
In terms of to what extent do we have to move and why. Our goal is to move as least as possible, take away those contaminants that are the worst, and then leave it in place and put engineering controls.
It sounded to me like this was actually about the most positive outcome we could have reasonably hoped for.
Yes.
Would you?
I would agree.
Yeah. Okay.
I like that you're upbeat, David. So just a couple of questions. Thank you very much for that report. I was, particularly worried in one of the earlier reports when hexavalent chromium was mentioned, and I'm really thrilled that that is not a concern here. So I know you said that we're talking with the insurance company and there's been a claim made. Do we expect that they will cover at least some of these expenses? Have they acknowledged? I know they've
acknowledged the claim. They've actually since the only expense at this point that we've had is with Whitman and Associates, we've actually reviewed that with them. They have not. One, we have a deductible, so that the first part of this is going to be on our cost. But they acknowledged the Whitman proposal. They've looked at it. They agreed with it. So as one of the things that we have to do each time we go to an expense or hire a professional, we bring it to their attention, and they'll tell us yes or no. That's something that they would accept. It will be a process because they're going to go through everything that once the soil samples are reviewed and the contaminants, and they'll make a determination of how much further they'll go with it. And I will keep council informed.
Okay. And I know that Mercer County brought charges against a company that was accused of illegal dumping, and I assume that would be at least one of the places that we would go to try to is it common or is it necessary that these companies that are doing business with us have insurance policies so that we can assume that there'll be money there to get? Is that part of the vetting process when we sign a contract with somebody?
But the insurance goes away once they're. Sorry. Unfortunately, they do need insurance when they're actually working for us. After they're no longer working for us, we'd have to see at that point.
Is that something that we could maybe think about going forward as we sign contracts with somebody, or is that just,
Right, I don't think we could.
Okay.
I'm just talking.
Okay.
One quick question.
Yeah, Ms. Williamson?
You just so I'm clear, you mentioned that we initially had a penalty from DEP for $35,000 was reduced to $30,000. Does our insurance cover that, or?
No, our insurance will not cover penalties. What will happen with the current penalty? NJDEP is still trying to figure out which kind of regulations we're going to go under. They will then send us what they call a settlement agreement that will lay out any penalties. So at this point, we're just waiting for them to kind of give us all of the information.
But unfortunately, it has
Yes.
to come out of the municipal
Unfortunately.
office. Okay.
I'm sorry, but that's something, again, we could seek compensation for from the company doing the illegal dumping.
We'll definitely review that with the environmental attorney, but I believe so.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I want to second Ms. Niedergang's recommendation that we do try to do everything we can to make sure this doesn't fall on the taxpayers, but falls on the responsible parties for causing the problem that we're dealing with right now. I know that when we go out to bid on a project, we have to choose the lowest responsible bidder. How does what's happening here affect someone's ability to say that they're a responsible bidder?
In terms of any of the contractors involved here,
I would say with any of their state work. Does if they're, I guess I'm curious about the connection between what's happening with the Mercer County Prosecutor's Office and then what the future of these companies are, and is there some way to leverage that? And maybe this is a conversation that we should have offline. Okay.
Yes.
I see the getting looked at by the lawyer. Well, I do just want to say to the public that it's that we are going to try to do everything we can to make sure that the expenses that are coming with this are paid by the people who are responsible for it and not by the taxpayers. All right. Are there any other questions for Mr. Shield? The other thing is the report. Can we get that posted up on the website so people can read
Absolutely.
through it? Okay, that would be great. All right, so now we'll move on to correspondence, and we have two items of correspondence, and we also have Lieutenant Maurer here too, because both of them have to do with road closures of one sort or another. The first is the letter from the Bayard Reston Center about the 2020 Pride Parade and a permit for that event. And the route for 2020, the proposal is for it to, instead of turning at Hamilton or Wiggins, it would continue all the way up to Nassau Street, cross Nassau Street, and go on to the university campus. And I guess, could we get some clarity as to if council is just receiving this correspondence, or if you'd like some feedback from council on this tonight?
We would definitely like feedback in terms of council, because this is an expanded parade route. We wanted to get the feedback from council. We discussed the other route previously with council, and now that it's been expanded, we would want your input.
Well, I'll start ahead, sort of two questions. The first was just making sure that the businesses and neighborhoods that would be impacted have been contacted already. The route would, it's more than just the closure of Witherspoon now. My understanding is that it's not just the intersection where the route would cross Nassau Street, but that the whole section of Nassau Street from Washington all the way to past Palmer Square would need to be closed in order for the police to help manage the traffic flow. So I just want to make sure that is a much bigger impact, to make sure that people aren't taken by surprise by that. So I would just like a report on what outreach has been done so far. And the other is the timing of the parade is it's being proposed for right in the middle of the day. And normally when we have parades, they're either at the beginning of the day or at the end of the day. And when you have it at the beginning of the day, it's not like 3 hours is the same if it's in the middle of the day or at the beginning of the day, because basically like the meters, actually in the beginning of the day is better because we have to bag the meters starting at the beginning of the day in order to make it work. So it would be, if you have it at 11, there'd be no parking between 2 a.m. the night before all the way till that afternoon. So basically be like, you couldn't be on Nassau Street all day long. Whereas if it's in the morning, like our other parades, then you could at least open up the road later on. And I would imagine from the business community and from the community's perspective, it'd just be, I think it would be less of a sort of severe economic impact on everybody if it were earlier in the day. Ms. Kremiller?
I was also wondering, since we would have to close Nassau Street, we would have both Witherspoon and Nassau Street closed, and maybe it would be preferable to just close Nassau Street and have the parade go from Washington. I mean, make a different route. I don't know if that sounds logical or.
Yeah, I don't know. Mr. Cohen?
I guess the question for Lieutenant Maurer, is there a standard that determines, how long Nassau Street would be held up, above which you have to close the street? In other words, if this parade is 2,000 people and it would take them 15 minutes to cross the street, would that be a short enough time to just stop traffic temporarily while they crossed? Or, is the cutoff 5 minutes, or what would be the timetable or the time frame below which you wouldn't have to cross Nassau Street just to allow people to cross it?
It's a two-part answer. The first is that if they're going to cross Nassau Street, we're going to close it at all. If we're going to close Nassau Street at all or have people on Nassau Street with an organized event, they're going to have to get a highway occupancy permit through Department of Transportation. So that's the first step, because they're on a state highway. The second thing would be, you try to look at it from a perspective of motorist, we'd want to close that and detour it, because looking through the timetables last year, the whole event was about an hour and a half in duration. And, when we have the different protest marches and stuff, when we stop traffic, the climate change march was the most recent one. I think people waited less than 10 minutes that were stuck in traffic but there was horn honking, there were people trying to make U-turns and stuff. So for an event of this size, we'd want to do a closure and detour. And then the other thing too, for safety, you'd want to close that and make sure that there weren't any vehicle and pedestrian conflicts, right at the crossing of Nassau. And just my big concern was, the impact to the central business district, and just making sure that there was proper notice given to all the merchants, that they were aware of it. The parking restrictions, like the mayor mentioned, we're going to have to bag the meters, probably around 6 a.m. and then keep them bagged until the event is over, just to make sure that there's not people that pull to the curb to grab a coffee and now they're stuck and can't leave. So it doesn't necessarily work if we went out to try to bag meters at 10 o'clock in the morning. Sure, you're going to have people that are parked up and down Witherspoon Street. It was a great event last year. The organizer was very receptive to any kind of suggestions or feedback. I think he was kind of in a holding pattern, and they did commit last year and followed through with it to working with the Witherspoon-Jackson neighborhood to get the word out. We did reach out to the housing authority. So we both kind of worked at it from separate angles as far as do the notification. But I just want to make sure that there's proper notice, and any kind of concerns that the merchants may have, that there's an opportunity to hear those and address them before the event actually transpires.
My question was, historically, I've been to parades or marches that are where you close the streets and they're earlier in the day. Historically, have you had any that are later in the day?
This, to my knowledge, is the first one that's held in the middle of the day like this. The Memorial Day parade is always first thing in the morning. There was a fireman's parade a long time ago that went, it was a pretty short route, but that was, my recollection was that was later in the day, but it was a pretty compressed route. It was pretty short. But this is the only one that I can think of in the last 20 years that I've been here that's in the middle of the day.
And if it requires a permit from the state, how far in advance does that need to be made?
Just based on working with the half marathon organizers, I think they can get things done within a 3 to 6 month time period.
Okay.
Ms. Craig?
First, I'd like to acknowledge what a success last year's Pride Parade was. I don't think that anyone up here has acknowledged that. I'm assuming that the organizers, since they did a thorough job in a short time frame last time, have contacted the university about the dispersal area. To me, that's the concern. If we stop at Fitz-Randolph Gate, that's a lot of people, and just happen to have Robert Seda-Shriver here who can address my concern.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much. It's an honor to stand before you, as always. Really appreciate the work you do. I figured this year, we gave you 8 weeks last time, so I figured we'd give you 8 months this time, and maybe we can get it together, get 3,000 or 4,000 to town. So thank you for this opportunity. Yeah, to answer your question directly, first, I've already been in Dean Dolan's office, and Jill is very much supportive and is thrilled with having the after party on campus. So that we've already been through those mechanics. As far as the merchants are concerned, Lori Urban and Jack Morrison were very supportive last year. We had them in-house with Chief Sutter. I haven't contacted them as of yet because I wanted to go through this process first. I thought that was the appropriate thing. But I am very confident that we'll do it with a very small footprint, as small as possible, to the businesses. In fact, I'll be honest with you, as I always am to a fault sometimes, but in this case it suits our purposes. Very many businesses in town were very, very appreciative of what people came to spend time in their stores after the parade. I keep saying last year, but it was this year, this calendar year. So I think that we have a really good process. Lieutenant Moore and Chief Sutter and the whole department, Peggy Brooks and the fire department and Bob Gregory, all were really incredibly generous to us in June and May leading up to it. And all joking aside, having this much of a time frame and a schedule to do the work, I think is going to make it just a really a fabulous event, and one that's going to really benefit the town and the community, the state, in a really great way. We really acknowledged and put together something that was spectacular. And it's now going to rest in between New Hope and Asbury and Maplewood and the other great celebrations that we have during Pride Month. And I think all of us, not just myself, obviously not just the Bayard Rustin Center for Social Justice, but the council, the mayor, the police department, the fire department, Mark, everybody that was involved, the businesses working together, really created something that was incredible, and that in 1 year put us on the calendar with all these other events that have been going on for many, many years. And I just can't wait to see what we put together for next year as well. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. And I would say that I think coming to us first before we've talked to the businesses or the neighbors, I think is a little bit backwards. So I think before we give the green light, I think we'd want to make sure that we're not catching them by surprise, because this is different than last year. I agree, it was a really wonderful event. But I'd want to get their feedback about the timing and other things like that.
I respect that. You know, again, I want to follow whatever procedure and whatever path is going to suit us all best in the town, in the community. I do want to say this, that last year we made a really conscious decision to go up Witherspoon, to engage the Witherspoon-Jackson neighbor, to include that community with our community. I thought that was really important. I don't want to lose sight of that connection and that relationship that we established. And I think that it was really, forgive me for saying this, I wax poetic sometimes, but a magical moment for two communities that sometimes are fraught to come together on that day. I don't want to lose that connection. But we also heard from many of our folks that they wanted to at least touch Nassau Street. That was important to them, to be in the same community, have the same opportunity that other parades and other groups have as well. So I thought that this plan, this route, would be the best way to do it with the least amount of footprint involved. And I think there are ways to imagine it that perhaps we haven't done before that might work. And I do want to say this also, because there are questions about getting the state permits and all the occupancy. We were 1 day away from getting all those permissions last year when we decided to alter the route a bit. But we can do that process. That process was done fully. It was really a matter of, I'll be quite explicit here, I want to be crystal, we just had to get the COI, the Certificate of Insurance. Once we had that, we were going to get all the permits we needed to use Nassau in this year. So I'm not concerned about having this time frame to do it in the time we need to. But of course, we are very, very cognizant of being as little a nuisance and as much complementary to the town, to the businesses, and to the community as possible.
Okay, great. So I think the next steps would be reaching out to some of the key business leaders, and then also it would be helpful for us, to, I think, to have something in writing from the university, just so that we're not getting ahead of our skis on that front, and we know that there's a place for people to go. And if you want to just check back in with police, I think this is not normally something that, or maybe it is something that council needs to do a vote on, since it's a Sunday event.
It's actually, it's a
Saturday event, I mean, yeah. Or do you want, should it come back for a vote, or is it just something that police would sign off on?
I would actually, the actual, it's not in the ordinance, but it is a policy that we have. But quite frankly, I think it can be done administratively, but we do need to get council to make sure we're all on the same page.
Okay.
Was there a vote this year? Just out of curiosity.
What's
For the previous parade, for the one this June, was there a vote for council for that?
No,
That's right.
but
That's
there
why
was
I'm saying
not
it's
enough
administrative.
time,
Right.
because we barely had a
appreciate
council
that.
meeting
I
in between the
threw it at you.
request and
I
the
take
parade.
full responsibility for that.
And so I think we were rushing on that. But I think especially if there's going to be a petition to the state, I think it would probably be helpful to have a formal process. So my recommendation is bring it back again after you have the two things, so the businesses, the university, and I'd also, I'd feel more comfortable voting yes if it were earlier start.
I'll consider that. Thank you.
Personally, I would say. I mean, I see nods from the rest of council too. I think
Yeah,
it's,
I'll add that given June 20th, starting early in the morning is going to be a blessing. It's going to be hot, and I think you'll be happier, and the financial reasons for us also add to that. But I also want to join my colleagues who have said, you know, what a special event this was for the town. It was just an honor for me to be part of it, and I think for so many of us it was welcome and long overdue. So thank you for that, and I'm sure we can work something out. And I understand what you mean about touching Nassau Street, so I'm sure we can figure out something that works for everybody.
I appreciate
So,
that.
thank you.
I just want to say that one of the things I do as the chief activist at the center is I will never speak for anybody. I'll speak with everybody, so I have to go back to my people and make sure they can get up that early.
thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
All right, and then the other correspondence we have is a petition from a group of residents on Jefferson Road, asking that Jefferson Road be closed for Halloween night for trick-or-treaters. Is there anybody here from Jefferson? No? Okay. Lieutenant Maurer, do you want to, can you
Sure, I can give you
just
a little.
give the police perspective on this request?
So this actually came up last year as well, and I found the emails from last year, and basically, then the issues and concerns I had are unchanged this year. I'm reluctant to advocate for a closing of a road for Halloween because I'm just concerned about creating conflicts at intersections as people drive up Jefferson Road and all of a sudden the road's blocked. Now they've got to do, either turn onto Hawthorne or do K-turns or U-turns to go back the way they came. And I'm just worried about putting people in conflict, with trick-or-treaters crossing at intersections. And then that displaces more traffic onto Hawthorne. It displaces more traffic potentially onto Moore Street. So I'm just worried about the unintended consequences of displacing that traffic for the one block section on Jefferson. So what we did last year was we actually put one of the variable message boards out. We weren't able to do that this year because we were publicizing the Alexander Road closure. And then we've transitioned into publicizing the half marathon coming up. So we've been moving the signs around at different locations. So I'm not going to be able to do that on Jefferson. What our proposal is going to be, if council doesn't grant the road closure permit or road closure request, is that we'll put barricades out if we were going to close the road. We've got 2 officers. We've beefed up patrols working for Mischief Night and Halloween. And I've got 2 officers assigned specifically for the Jefferson Moore Street neighborhood. And then my thought was we would put barricades out. Sergeant Murray is actually one of the officers who's working that night, our traffic sergeant. Leave it up to him if he felt that it was an unsafe situation given the traffic flow that night. The infrastructure would be in place for him to actually close the road then, if need be, due to the volume of trick-or-treaters and stuff. But right now the forecast I just looked seems to be getting worse for Halloween. Now they're talking about rain and wind. So I don't know what the volume is going to be like, if that's going to impact the trick-or-treaters or not. But I think by keeping it open, we advocated for residents to keep all their exterior lights on because they're, just to increase the lighting on the street. But I just had concerns about putting up a roadblock basically for motorists that might be, trying to get home late or, and then putting them in conflict with kids in the intersection.
I understand why people would want to have the road closed for the safety of the trick-or-treaters. Unfortunately, as we see in a lot of public policy, you think you're fixing one problem, but what you're doing is just transferring the problem to nearby communities. And so that's a preface to the question I'm going to ask. Does Jefferson Road get any more trick-or-treaters or higher volume of trick-or-treaters than many other communities?
It is the central. It is swarmed.
I actually would disagree.
My kids always talk about Ella Farm for some reason. My 3 kids growing up in
There's several spots.
They have not mentioned Jefferson Road to me, so I was unaware that it was a particularly
But
great.
Moore Street is also very, very highly trafficked. So
That's what I'm saying. I'm
it's
sure
right
and
there,
there are
yeah.
other streets also.
Yes.
So my question, this is for a second part, which is because if we were to do this for Jefferson Road, why would we not do it for other places that have as much volume for the same reasons? And if we do so, of course, now we're creating possible unintended consequences in other neighborhoods, like you're saying, which actually creates another set of dangers.
Yes.
So we may not be actually solving anything, unfortunately, by
that's exactly right.
doing what, and I know the petitioners meant well by doing this. I just want them to understand that this may not solve a problem. It may actually cause problems elsewhere.
I agree with you 100%. And we have had concerns expressed for Edel Farm in years past, and that's actually one of the other locations that we've designated extra officers to be at based on prior concerns that were expressed with volumes of trick-or-treaters and traffic.
Okay.
So I can tell you from having, not that long ago, having kids who wanted to go to the places with the best candy, the big bars, it's more than one. It's more than Jefferson, Edel Farm, Washington Oaks, and there's some places that have even less lighting. So that is my concern, is that if we, and can I say that most of the trick-or-treaters come from other places? So it's just, especially I think if we hear that Jefferson Road is going to be closed, I think that would even multiply the number of parents who drop off their kids on Jefferson.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my concern, that there's more than one place that has.
It sounds like there's a lot of support for your position.
Okay.
But yeah, Mr. Quinn?
Just a follow-up, it looks like it's going to be.
Mr.
Oh,
Quinn
I'm
and
sorry.
then Ms. Niedergang.
I would agree with Councilwoman Fraga. The difference with Jefferson Road is that it's sort of a main entryway to the town that I think naturally gets a lot of traffic of people heading downtown, which is, I think, part of the concern as articulated by the neighbors. We heard last year from a few neighbors, and I thought the response of the police was, I fully support the plan. Just want to point out that it's a little different in Washington Oaks than it is at Jefferson, is sort of an entryway. And come on to Jugtown if you're looking for the new hot Halloween neighborhood.
I just wanted to add that just looking at the weather forecast, unfortunately, it looks like it could be very heavy rain. And how does that affect your ability to, ensure the safety of our kids and the adults with them?
So the officers are going to be out in the rain. We're probably not going to have the bike patrols out in the rain, but we'll have our officers out. And they'll be out patrolling. Again, like if based on the volume of trick-or-treaters and stuff, they feel they need to close Jefferson, we'll close Jefferson. But I think maintaining a highly visible presence, and we told them, like, nobody should be in the police station. Any reports you can wait till later, but everybody should be out on the road driving around in case anybody needs assistance or just to be a visible, presence during trick-or-treating times.
May I ask a follow-up question? Are there any particular, we talked about high-volume areas. Are there any particular intersections, et cetera, of particular concern that you make sure you always have a police presence there because of maybe something that's happened in the past?
We've been fortunate, knock on wood, we haven't, no, I don't have anything that's glaring other than we've assigned Edel Farm, Jefferson Road, are the two big hotspots based on, prior issues, but we're trying to break people up geographically so that one area isn't necessarily saturated with officers, so that you'll see officers driving through, Princeton Community Village or, different neighborhoods throughout town, and everybody's not focused in one big area.
Yeah, it is great that the petitioners know that the police are doing something. It's not like if the road doesn't get closed, it's like nothing extra being done to protect the trick-or-treaters and the public in general there.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay, well, thank you. And just a PSA for everybody who's out driving that night to be really careful, because there's so many little kids who are running around in the dark and get so excited they're not thinking about crossing the street safely like they would under normal circumstances. Okay, so now we have our work session tonight, and this is on energy aggregation. And I'd like to invite up Christine Symington from Sustainable Princeton. And just to set the stage for this discussion. Council is not going to be voting on anything tonight, but it's helpful to give some feedback into how to structure the RFP that's going to be going out in a few days, so that when the RFP comes back to council, we're happy with what people have bid on.
All right. Also with me is Ann Shosh. I'll let her introduce herself.
I'm Ann Shosh. I'm a new member of the Princeton Environmental Commission, and I've been to several meetings on this topic.
Thank you. So, as you may recall, the council has adopted a Princeton Climate Action Plan. The goals are reduce emissions 80% by 2050.
Hey, Christine, the mics are just really soft tonight, so if you just be like really close to
Loud?
it and talk loud.
Okay.
Good.
As you remember, Princeton Council adopted a climate action plan. There is a goal to reduce emissions 80% by 2050. In order to do this, Princeton needs to reduce emissions from electricity consumptions and also need to replace fossil fuels in our electricity mix with more renewables. So you can see in the pie chart just what the snapshot of where our electricity is coming from, and that little tiny purple is renewables. So we really have to move the dial on that if we're going to reach our goal. Renewable government energy aggregation was the strategy identified by the Energy Working Group. Bob Chilton of Gable Associates presented it to council previously. To move this action forward, a ad hoc subcommittee was formed of the Environmental Commission, of which Ann was on, so that's why she's here presenting along with me. There have been a number of towns in New Jersey that have implemented a renewable government energy aggregation program. I've listed them here. As you can see, the general term has been around 17, 18 months. They have had various percentages, what is called the Enhanced Renewable Energy Product. And you can see the various prices that they were able to receive. All of these were at a discount to the basic generation service a resident would receive on their utility bill. And you can see what the estimated customer savings is over the term of that program per account.
But can you explain the last one, New Brunswick, that has two?
So New Brunswick chose to have two options. There was a default option, and then there was an opt-up option for residents who wanted to have what is the 100% enhanced renewable energy product. And as you can see, that was a little bit more expensive, so that was how they went about it. So there have been a number of meetings with the consultant. As I mentioned, they were here previously. They presented this on May 28th. Council approved an ordinance in September, which allowed the municipality to form the entity that will enter into a contract with a third-party electricity provider. And since then, the ad hoc committee has met several times, and with the consultant and also with a number of subject matter experts, so we can, make sure that we're going about this in a way that will achieve our goals, achieve a savings, and allow our ability to have this collective purchasing process to increase the amount of renewable energy that is being generated and replacing fossil fuel. So I'm going to hand over to Ann.
Okay, so one of the things that the ad hoc committee was given was a very specific schedule that we would need to follow in order to get this proposal into place and up and running by March. And we are under a bit of a deadline here in that we need to submit a legal document by Halloween to start the process. There's then about a month when this would go out to bid. We would hope to get some bids back by early December. And then when we get these bids, council would either have to decide whether to reject or accept them. And there's apparently a law that you cannot accept a bid on a Monday or a Friday. So council would have to meet on Tuesday to accept a bid or reject it. And you only have 24 hours once you get the bid to accept or reject it. So it kind of looks like council would have to meet on December 3rd, which is a Tuesday, to make this decision. It's possible that we won't get favorable quotes, in which case council would have to decide what we would be doing next. If we do get an offer that Princeton wants to accept, then about a month after that, we would be wanting to notify people that this is an opt-out program, which means that you're automatically included unless you opt out. There's mailings that would be done, and the consultants seem to have a lot of ideas about just how you would do this. And then the suggestion was that you would follow up with public information sessions the next week, and then service could begin in early March or whenever the customer is likely to be billed during that period. Meter reading, sorry. So at the September 25th meeting, the Environmental Commission voted to approve the first option that you see there. Consultant recommends that it's possible to request either one or two options. They strongly suggest against three. So the Environmental Commission voted in favor of the first option, but there are a couple of other options that might be worth discussion. Should I go into more about what they are? Go ahead.
Yeah, so I want to gauge from the council how much you would like to go into this detail. In terms of getting the RFP out in time, we do plan on the ad hoc subcommittee of, doing a little more research into these other two second options. We realize that they're a little complicated to read and understand what this is, but we can basically, generalize what the other two options are attempting to achieve.
I feel like, having been present, that the Environmental Commission engaged in a substantial debate about this. My personal inclination is that you got, they're the experts on this, and I personally would defer to them. I don't know how my colleagues feel.
Well, I just had a question about if we were to pick two options and to do an opt-up, was the Environmental Commission, were they leery of doing that, or they just ran out of time to sort of figure out which of those opt-up options to recommend?
Yeah, and I think there was also a desire not just to run out of time, but just to keep it simple. But there wasn't a consensus actually when they voted. And so we felt like we needed to go back and sort of understand why there wasn't a consensus and dig into it a little deeper. And so I think that was really why we went back after the PEC meeting to sort of understand why there wasn't a consensus about not having a second option.
And the ad hoc meeting had discussed having two options with an opt-up. So if you look at the three options that we've listed here, probably the least expensive one would be the first one. The second one would be more expensive than the first one, but less expensive than the third one. And the difference between the second and the third one is that the second one is getting renewable energy from wind farms in the Southwest, Texas, Oklahoma primarily. The third option would be getting all of its renewable energy locally, which means that there would be a greater benefit to the local area, but it would cost more. In fact, we're not really sure how much the third option would cost, but it could be that it would be a premium over regular electrical rates, which is kind of what's true of third-party suppliers now.
And I just wanted to comment, referring back to that first table with the other communities that have successfully pursued this. there were several that had 100% renewable options. I'm going to speculate, based on our conversations in recent days, that none of them had 100% of local renewables. Is that correct?
That is correct. The only one I'm not certain of is New Brunswick. I've looked at their agreement, and whatever they made publicly doesn't include a description of what the 50 and 100% is. So I don't have an answer on New Brunswick yet.
But the price of the two options is so close together, it seems unlikely that
Right.
they
Unlikely. Right. I mean, there are differences in why different towns got better prices than others. A lot of that has to do with the energy profile of the town. So there are variables that determine who gets more of a savings, not necessarily who has more residents. So I would hazard it was because it was completed. They made it 100% with National Wind and not fully local. What we're talking about is renewable energy certificates that are purchased from energy plants in our local territory, the PJM territory, which is the local grid where all of our electricity gets supplied from. And so we're talking about buying and retiring certain types of renewable energy certificates is really the mechanism behind this. It's not like when we plug something into an outlet, we're actually directly getting that energy from renewable source. So we want to make sure that that's clear. That's when we're talking about procuring renewable energy, we're buying and retiring certificates that represent that renewable electricity was generated at some point in time somewhere. And a national wind REC it was generated in somewhere outside of our territory, probably Texas or Oklahoma. A PJM REC is something that was electricity that was generated from a renewable source in our territory. So that's parts of New Jersey, it's Pennsylvania, I think, it's West Virginia, it's a number of different states that's our territory. So that's what we mean when we say local.
Right. I really support this, and so when this question, it's not to make it seem like I don't support it, but we're not actually reducing we're changing the way we're paying for electricity, but we're not actually changing any way that electricity is being produced. We're just changing the way we're paying for it. In other words, we're not actually reducing our carbon footprint at all by doing this. Is that correct?
Not exactly.
No.
I mean, the whole point of these renewable energy certificates is they're intended to encourage investment in clean energy production.
And that's why I'm supporting it. I'm saying I'm supporting it, but
Yeah. So
it's not like our air is going to be any cleaner right here in Princeton. And it's not like anybody's reduced the use or anything.
It won't be tomorrow, but it might be next year or the year after.
Yeah, the way I think of it is you look at that pie chart, Jenny, what are the things that are going to make that purple slice bigger and the other, like the coal, smaller? And that's by getting more renewable energy generation on the grid, more plants built, displacing those other sources. And so this market mechanism of renewable energy certificates is one mechanism that does it.
I know, I understand that, and that's why I'm supporting it, but it doesn't seem like we should be it's kind of like we're buying our way out of reducing our emissions or something, because we're not really.
Can we characterize that as saying we're just doing our part to increase demand to get energy from renewable sources?
Yes.
And if other folks start doing the same thing, then we're on a much better path than we are now.
And we're sending a signal to the market
Right.
and to others that this is something that is important to our community. And it's one of the many actions. It is not going to get us there. We need to use less to begin with, right? But if we're going to clean up the grid, this is a role that we can play.
And
it's a mechanism in place that we can, it's a
I
established
understand
mechanism.
I just feel a little bit more skeptical that we're actually, it doesn't feel right to be using it as part of our climate action plan, because I don't think we're really, I think it's more like making a contribution to the cause is what we're doing. And I think that's a valid thing to do.
in the spirit of what Eve was saying about letting the experts decide, this is a conversation I've been having with Christine pretty hot and heavy, and we definitely need a weed whacker to release us from the deep weeds that we've gotten into. But there are protocols for calculating our emissions that we have adopted, put out by ICLEI, and they reflect the expert's judgment on how to calculate your emissions. And my point is that if the experts have decided that it's appropriate for us to take credit for retiring RECs, renewable energy
what's ICLEI?
certificates.
I'm sorry.
ICLEI is, remind us what.
They are the entity that has the greenhouse gas inventory methodology that we're following. So it's the U.S. Community Protocol that most cities use to do their emissions inventory. And so they're the ones that will tell you, okay, if you do this action, this is how you can account for it in your inventory as to producing and reducing emissions.
Now, it's still not 100% clear how the RECs impact that calculation. And I really don't want to go into that in detail, but the point is, once we figure it out, if we're allowed to take credit for retiring RECs in calculating our emissions, the experts are telling us that's okay and we should do it. I think that as a community, if we try to question and vet and authenticate every point in the point system for figuring out how you're meeting your climate action plan goals, we are never going to get anywhere, basically.
And I would mention that one of the other goals is to realize a cost savings. So we are trying to save money for people on their utility bills. So we wouldn't accept a bid that didn't have a cost savings of at least 10% or so. But I think this also sets the municipality in a position of sort of like the next step after this, which what we're learning other cities are trying to do is use their collective purchasing power for the residential electricity demand in more direct ways that may influence the development of renewables and maybe even assisting with supporting specific projects. So I think that's something that once we get this process going, if there's a bid that's favorable and we enter into an agreement, we should pretty soon start talking about, okay, well then what's next? What else can we do now that we sort of got an understanding of what we might be able to accomplish?
Let's go back to. Okay, so just go back one for a sec. So we're fairly certain that the first one is likely to bring about a savings for Princeton residents, as well as retire some RECs. The other two options, as we said, would be a little bit more expensive and could be an opt-in for people who want it.
Well, oh, okay. You still going, or are you done?
We have like two more slides. So typically contract terms run for 19 to 24 months. And as we said before, they're likely to start in March if we get a bid that we accept. And the only other thing to probably begin thinking about is if we do get a bid that we accept, we need to think about putting in place ways to send out the opt-out notices, who and where and when will run the public information sessions. After 30 days, the opt-out period ends. And then we might also want to think about how we're going to contact people who are already with third-party providers who might want to opt into the program.
Yeah, just to clarify that the role that the consultant will play that's part of their agreement with the municipality is they will do a lot of this heavy lifting of managing the list and the mailing of the opt-out notices, helping to schedule and facilitate the public information sessions, any other types of materials, information, FAQs that would need to be provided. They'll even have a web page up where people can go to find out more information. But the 30-day opt-out period is sort of by law, so we have to sort of stick with that. And as Ann mentioned, yeah, there will be some people who won't be eligible if they're already have a third-party electricity provider, so they would have to opt in. And I believe if you have solar, you're excluded too. But The consultant will get all that information for PSE and G, so they'll know who should be in it and who shouldn't.
Okay. Well, I think I'm hearing from most everybody that people are comfortable with the PEC recommendation. I sort of personally like the idea of the opt-up, but I'm not sure if there's consensus for that or to just keep it simple. So I think I'm guessing from what people said before that more people want to just keep it simple, but should we take a hand vote or
I would
who
just
likes the idea of an opt-up of some form?
I would just make a pitch for delivering some savings to people, even if it's relatively small, and it may also incline them. This is a relatively short-term agreement. They see some savings. Maybe the next one we push for, we take the next step up. So I would put some sugar in it, that they're not just morally feeling like they're doing good, but my bill has gone down by $10 a month. Yeah, I can see that. I think it's important for people that's the position I would take.
But if that's the base service and then you allow people who want to do more to opt up, that's okay with you? Because I agree with Mayor that I would like to have the opt-up option personally.
Okay.
I like it too.
Okay, okay.
Although I would also leave it to the people who are going to have to implement the whole program if they feel like it's too complicated. If that's what you thought, okay.
I think if New Brunswick can figure it out, we can figure it out too. I mean, but
Yeah, we wouldn't be the first ones to do an opt-up, so that's.
okay, because it looked like they're two different levels where two different times they'd gone out.
No, it's the same agreement, and then they went out, when they publicized it, they said, here, if you do nothing, this is what you'll have. If you would like to opt up, you need to tell us within a certain amount of time, and they'll switch you. Same as like the opt-out period. If you don't want to be part of the program at all, you have to let us know, but if you want to opt up. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I thought that's what we were proposing.
Yes, yeah,
Okay, so it's what they did in New Brunswick.
yes.
Okay. Okay.
And I just want to comment, I'm really glad that you're addressing the issue of the people who are already receiving third-party agreements, because for those who aren't familiar, the ones that are available to individuals tend to be more expensive and not terribly positive from an environmental standpoint. So not to have those folks left out of this opportunity is really important to me. So I'm glad that there's a consciousness, awareness of trying to solve that issue.
Do we know how many there are like that? How many?
Not now. We will know once the utility has released the data to the consultant.
Yeah, my understanding is it can be very difficult to get out of those. So, but I guess Gable will know how to proceed.
It depends. I'm one of the third-party supplier people, and I can opt out at any time.
Okay.
But I think we would tell residents that they should read their contract, because we don't know who they're contracting with, and find out if there are any early penalties for getting out of the contract early. But yeah, we want to make sure that they aren't really, they're going to read their contract. The answers to the questions is with their third-party provider.
And I guess my other question about the opting up, is that going to slow down the ability to get the RFP out in the timeline you had already set up, or you're all set to go?
No, we just have to figure out which one of these opt up, and then
Okay.
that will go into the RFP as the requested enhanced renewable energy product, and we have to do that by the 31st.
Okay, terrific. All right, well, it sounds like we're excited, and
Thank
fingers
you.
crossed
Yeah.
that we get some exciting bids back that will save us money and help us save the earth at the same time.
Right.
To
We
the
don't know,
degree
and I do
that
want to
we're
remind
saving
council that other towns had to do this multiple times before the
Okay.
markets were favorable, so we may have to do that.
Okay, that's good to know.
Well, that reminds me, because I do want to remind you that I looked into this like 5 or 6 years ago and went through this.
We won't forget that.
Because
Jenny.
everybody kept saying, oh, the council never did this. And we did.
Thank you, Jenny. It's sometimes, it's like with a lot of things, you go through the process and do a lot of the work, and then you have to have the timing that's right. Same thing with the solar field at the at River Road. It was like that was all put together, and it was actually several years before the timing was right to get
So
back
we'll,
bids.
just a bureaucratic note, we'll schedule a council meeting for the
December
3rd?
3rd.
Oh,
I was
yeah,
gonna
that was
ask
my
about
other
that.
question. Does it have to be on December
Right.
3rd, or could it just be sometime that
This is
week?
24
Was that
hours.
like a major, was that a?
Seems crazy, by the
The
way.
consultant said either just the 3rd or the 4th, which is, I
Okay.
think, it has to be, that was their schedule.
Okay.
when
Within
they were
24
available that
hours
week.
of when we
Between
receive the
Mayor.
bids, is
Doesn't
what
that
you
seem
said.
crazy?
Okay, well, hold on. You can't, people need to ask if they want to be recognized by the chair instead of shouting, because it's like, we want to have some order here. Mr. DeShield?
We're going to attempt to find out whether we can do a resolution at the 18th that could just authorize me under a certain limit that would eliminate the need for this meeting. So I'll work with the attorneys on that.
Okay, terrific. Thank you. We also have a meeting on December 2nd, so we have more time if it's not ready by the 18th. Okay, we have 2 public hearings tonight. Wait, I skipped over reports, I think. I skipped over council reports, I realized, because I forgot to make a note to myself. So we'll go back and do council reports, and then we'll do the public hearings. So I'll start on my right this time with Ms. Niedergang. Do you
And
have any
this time I'm
reports?
ready. Just a couple of things from Princeton Environmental Commission. The Princeton Environmental Commission voted to support the passage presentation of a backyard poultry ordinance to council, and this will come before council later this year as a work session. The Board of Health reviewed and commented on the ordinance, and some changes were made as a result of that. PC also discussed measures that could be taken to support electric vehicles and the possible introduction of a plastic bag ordinance in 2020. The Board of Health discussed some residents' health concerns about the fueling station, and the Board of Health will submit a report to the mayor on this issue, and that will come up, I assume, when we have our fueling station discussion on the 18th. Board of Health is also continuing to work on the issue of vaping, and there's some concerns that the bill that Murphy's commission, the series of proposals that Governor Murphy's commission have come up with, might have the effect of weakening our vaping ordinance. For example, the cost to have a vaping license could be fixed statewide at $50, whereas ours, I think, is $1,200 or something like that. So I'm not sure what we can do about it, but we should kind of be on the alert about this and not hesitate to reach out to our Assembly and State Senate reps to make sure that we can choose to have a higher enforcement level, because we only have 4, I think, licensed company distribution, thank you, that can sell vaping products, and if the cost goes down to 50, we could have many, many more. So that's a concern. And then from the Shade Tree Commission, they're continuing, the arborist and the Shade Tree Commission is continuing to plan for how to deal with the emerald ash borer, which apparently now has done over $1 billion worth of damage. Which is pretty sobering, and we have a lot of trees here in Princeton, a lot of ash trees that'll have to be removed both this fall and beyond that. The new pest of concern is the spotted lanternfly, which is a very beautiful pest, and it's not quite clear if that's going to have the same impact at this point. Hopefully not. And finally, there's a plan to get the trees on Nassau Street pruned over the university break and stumps ground, and hopefully new plantings put in next spring. This depends on cooperation with the state, which owns Nassau Street, as most of you in the room now know. All right, thank you.
Ask a question of Councilwoman Niedergang. In relation to the used to be called the chicken ordinance. So you described it tonight as poultry. So this is it started as chickens, then it was called the hen ordinance, and now it's called poultry. So does it include because pigeons are poultry, so.
I don't remember offhand, maybe Health Officer Gerser would know whether it is actually now technically poultry or just hens. It might be just hens.
I believe it's switched to poultry because the ducks are also included.
Right. Yeah. But they have to be.
Ducks are also included.
Whatever poultry
Yes, yeah.
they are strictly female.
By definition, they are.
Only
So,
females.
so we're going to, ducks and geese will be, and ganders will be,
No gander.
okay, I'm sorry.
So actually, Ms. Dietergang and I had a conversation about the status of this ordinance before the meeting, and I recommended having it come to council in 2019 as a work session, or as like a fuller report, so people know what's going to be proposed, even though the ordinance itself is not going to be coming to council until 2020. Just so before there's a lot more legal work done on it, that we make sure that what we're having the attorneys draw up is actually something where there's at least some general consensus on council of support. So I'll work with you on scheduling to get it in, and then issues like this
Great.
can be discussed ad nauseum.
I
at
withdraw
that
my
moment.
question until the work session.
It's a discriminatory ordinance against males, absolutely. So.
I'd also be curious about the public support for it too. So I think it's a good idea.
No reports?
Yes, Mayor. The Public Works Committee continues in a due diligence phase of its examination of issues related to the fueling station. The committee met today with Donna Braden, the transportation coordinator for Princeton Public Schools, to discuss the circulation of large school buses on the site. And we communicated our concerns regarding enforcement of the proper hours of fueling. We thank the Board of Health for its memo regarding health concerns raised by the neighbors, and we want to acknowledge an additional communication from members of a task force of Site Plan Review Advisory Board members. Members of the committee will review this communication and additional materials provided by staff in advance of a report to the full council on November 18th. And I thank my colleagues for their flexibility in scheduling the regular meeting to the earlier date in November so that we can have, what did you call it, Jenny? A special regular meeting or a regular special meeting. We were also pleased to see that NJDOT completed restriping of the intersection today. We hope that this will help with traffic circulation. Councilman Cohen and I attended a neighborhood meeting about the upcoming curbing and sidewalk replacement, and Ms. Stockton and members of engineering and the police department attended, and I'd say it was a very productive meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Fraga?
Just one quick one regarding the permit parking task force. Earlier this month, we held a community meeting that we held open to the public to get input from the public regarding their thoughts on overnight, the different areas, whether overnight, daily parking, and it was really, really well attended, considering it was a very rainy night. So we weren't sure if we were going to get too many people coming up, but it actually was. I estimate about between 55 and 60 participants. But something came up at that meeting that I just felt the need to clarify. Some folks that were believe that the report the task force desired to be open and transparent, and just keep everyone informed as to the deliberations of the task force. We made the report public, and it's on the website. But there were still, even though there's draft written all over each page, there were some folks that were under the impression that these were the recommendations of the task force, and I just wanted to clarify again that they are not. These are just deliberations. We're still receiving input, and the work of the task force continues.
No
Mr.
reports.
Williamson? Okay. I have a couple reports. The first is this is sort of in some ways a response to Ms. Niedergang's reports. I was the visitor at Littlebrook, their 5th grade class for Character Counts Week, and you never know what kind of questions you're going to get. So I was asked what my position was on backyard chickens. It was, not surprisingly, environmental issues and climate change issues were really big. They were very much in support of a plastic bag ban. I asked them there's a question about it, so I asked them to raise their hands, and it was all 3 5th grade classes were together, and every kid raised their hand in support, and except for, I think there were 3 kids who didn't want one. There was a suggestion for an improvement at the skate park, which I sent over to Recreation Department. And probably the most popular opinion was they wanted half days on Thursdays and Fridays. And I told them I could give them some political advice, but I couldn't give that to them.
All in favor?
Yeah. Last week, the DOT commissioner was in town for a ceremony in front of what's going to be a new traffic signal and crosswalk. There's going to be 2 being put in on Harrison Street at Hamilton and at Franklin, thanks to Deanna Stockton and the engineering team, and a $670,000 Safe Routes to School grant. So congratulations again to Deanna for securing that money. And when the commissioner was here, there was also talk about the all pedestrian cross at Nassau Street. And I think everybody from Princeton helped to make the case that this was a really good addition to the town and helped with safety. And she expressed her commitment to it as well. So I think that was good.
Does that mean that we can get some adjustment in the timing
Well, we
there?
also had a discussion about that.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think there's a recognition that it might still need some tweaking, but the concept itself has been really great for pedestrian safety. And I wanted to thank everybody who came and helped at the downtown cleanup a few Sundays ago. It was a really great event, and for even folks who weren't able to come but sort of helped with the planning, I want to thank them too. I think there's interest in trying to set something up again in the spring for another similar event. And finally, the ad hoc group that's looking at the food waste digester has met a couple times. We had a meeting with local farmers that might be potentially interested in bidding on the machine, and got some useful feedback from them too, and are still working through some of the details before deciding next steps. And we'll be bringing those back to council with a report probably at the next meeting. Okay. Are there any staff reports? Ms. Stockton?
In advance of Alexander Street closing next week, the gas company is still working on putting in place a bypass line for natural gas service. So that's ongoing work that is requiring the roadway to be alternating traffic from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. during the week. Engineering has piggybacked upon that alternating traffic to replace curbing on Alexander between West Drive and Basin Street. We're hoping from the engineering side to get our work done in the next couple of days, and There is a reservation for the gas company, if needed, that they could do a full closure on this Saturday to complete their work. But Nixle and the police through Nixle are continuing to put out up-to-date information regarding the road closures and the alternating traffic. There was a question about a bridge that had appeared over the DNR Canal and whether that was going to be a pedestrian access point, and it's actually part of the superstructure that's holding up the bypass pipe for the gas company, is my understanding. So it will not be open to the public for use. Tomorrow we will start work on Mount Lucas Road between Cherry Hill and Valley Road. The road is going to be closed to all traffic between 8:30 a.m. and 2:30 p.m. We've put out a notification to all of the fuel station users that they have to fuel before 7:45 a.m. or after 3:45 p.m., and that's in conjunction with those peak hour fueling prohibitions that are currently in place. One question that has come up is in regards to Election Day. With the schools being out on that day, we would like to be able to allow the contractor to move ahead and work a 7 a.m. to, say, 4, 5, or 6 p.m. day. But with the closure, we are detouring traffic. Traffic has to actually go onto Mount Lucas Road North to Jefferson, back to Valley, to get back to the Witherspoon Street area. And I'm seeking feedback from council whether you would like us to maintain an 8:30 to 2:30 workday, or if we could expand to the 7 to 6 time frame on that day. And just to add to that, on Thursday and Friday of that same week, we will be allowing the 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. workday because school's out of session with the teachers' convention.
Right, and I think we also received an email from a neighbor that the 2:30 closure, or the 2:30 end might not work on some of those days. There's a Halloween parade one of the days, and then there's half days for teacher conferences on a couple of those days too. So on days when school does not get out at 3, we probably want to adjust to whatever the school schedule is for the traffic at the end of the day. And I can't remember those dates offline. I know that there's a Halloween parade one of those days, probably on Halloween.
Okay, 'cause if that's the case, then we may need to not work that entire day. I don't know if the contractor wants to bring his crews in for, 4 hours. So we'll have to look into that.
Right, and maybe and also if it's raining, maybe it's a lost day anyway.
It could be a moot point.
Right.
Exactly.
But I think it's pretty important that the work gets done, and so I think as long as the detours are clear, it's a place that's people come. There's a lot of people who come both to this building and to Community Park School to vote. So I think we just want to make sure that we don't put in a detour that in any way makes it hard for people to get to the voting locations. But I think as long as it's clearly marked and if we're confident if it's not going to cause any confusion, if we're cutting off some of the other work days, I think it's probably important to get the work done.
I agree with that. I was going to say, I think we should do that. And I think, we're closing it between Terhune, Valley and Terhune, right?
Valley and Cherry
and
Hill.
Cherry Hill.
And Cherry Hill, yeah.
I agree that the longer workday is, I think, fine to do, but I do want to make sure that pedestrian access through the work area is possible on Election Day, because there may be a lot of people from that neighborhood who prefer to walk to the polls, and we want to make sure they don't have to take the long detour.
Okay, we'll do that definitely. Thank you.
I had another question too about the Alexander closure. So was it closed this past weekend? Because it seemed like the second it was closed, then it was reopened. How long was it actually closed for?
It was closed from 8 p.m. on Friday night. I think the water company finished their work around 3 a.m. Our contractor finished his work about 7 a.m. And I think by the time the county got out, it was probably 10 or 11 when the road reopened in the morning on Saturday morning.
Okay. So it wasn't closed enough to really make any judgments about the impact.
There was a
on it.
provision that it could stay closed until I think it was 5 a.m. on Sunday morning, but neither our contractor nor the water company required that amount of time.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you. All right, so we'll move on now to the public hearings. And the first public hearing is Ordinance 2019-36, an ordinance of the municipality of Princeton concerning long-term parking at the Princeton Station metered parking yard and amending the code of the Borough of Princeton, New Jersey, 1978. And just as a reminder for everybody, this is in part in response to the closure of Alexander. And right now we allow for people to park at the Dinky lot for up to a week. And we don't want those spots being tied up that way. We want to make sure there's enough spots for the commuters. So people will only be able to park there for up to 2 days during the closure. And I'd like to open up the public hearing on this ordinance. And seeing no one, I'll close the public hearing and bring it back to council. Is there a motion to approve?
I'll move.
Moved by Ms. Fraga
Second.
and seconded by Mr. Quinn. Any final discussion or comments? Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Yes.
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 And the ordinance passes unanimously. Next is ordinance 2019.
I'm sorry, Mayor, before we go on, can I just, I think that we talked about this, but just to make sure that there are adequate signs posted so that people know that this is a change and they don't get there planning to go away for a week and discover that, alas, they can only park for 2 days. So, thank you.
That's a good idea. I don't know if it's easier to just post those signs for now, like inside the station or up at the platform. Maybe we can work with the university on where to post those.
Yeah, we don't currently have any signage that indicates what the time limit is. It's completely within the programming of the parking meter, the pay station, so we can look at putting something within the station.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's just the meter that says you can park for, but it's only going to affect a few people who know that you can do this, which most people don't, but I care about them, so.
Sometimes even maybe we can put, everything there is on a pay station too, right? Right, but the permits, it's not going to impact the permits. It'll only impact people paying at the pay station.
Correct.
Right,
It's
so we can
it's
just put
only
the
the
signs.
public parking and not the university permits.
Right, so we could put the signs up on the pay stations.
I wonder if you could
about-
put one on the Dinky, inside the Dinky. Are there,
I don't know. We'll leave it to you to figure out where to put the signs up. But to Ms. Niedergang's point, I think it's helpful to put the signs up before the rule actually goes into effect, so people know. Okay, ordinance 2019-37, an ordinance of the municipality of Princeton concerning loud, continuous, or excessive noise, and amending Chapter 21 of the Code of the Borough of Princeton, New Jersey, 1974. This again is in response to the Alexander closure, and there's going to be a companion resolution coming up, and essentially this will allow us to put some flexibility into the time when trash pickups can happen, so we can get those trucks in and out of town early before the traffic starts in the morning. So I'd like to open up the public hearing for this ordinance. And seeing no one, I'll close the public hearing and bring it back to council. Is there a motion to approve?
I'll move it.
Oh, second.
So moved by Mr. Cohen, seconded by Ms. Niedergang. Mr. Cohen?
I have just a quick question. This applies throughout the town, correct? I mean, it makes reference to an ordinance of the Borough of Princeton that this is amending, and I want to make sure that this is throughout the town.
It applies throughout Princeton. It's just referencing the specific code section where these regulations happen to be parked until you have a unified code.
Okay,
That's
great.
all. But yeah, it applies throughout.
Yeah, and just as by way of explaining my interest, I had suggested, early fueling at the fueling station to help with some of the congestion issues that the neighbors are concerned about, and was hoping that this also allows that to happen, as well as the early trash pickups and so forth, should we decide to go in that direction.
Yeah, this is an amendment to your noise ordinance, and I'm not even sure that the noise ordinance speaks to that, and it's on municipal property. So I think when your employees can fuel is within your control. You don't
Yeah, I was
need
just
the ordinance
concerned
in.
that some of the larger public works vehicles might be considered noisy. And
Yeah, no, but I'm saying you can just deal with that administratively and internally. That's not the sort of thing that you would need any kind of code amendment to address.
Are we not subject to any of our own ordinances?
You are not.
Okay. Are there any other questions or comments on this? Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Yes.
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 All right, I was expecting one more vote. Okay, so the ordinance passes unanimously. And next we come to an ordinance introduction, ordinance 2019-38, an ordinance by the municipality of Princeton authorizing the acquisition of a stormwater easement on property designated as block 9301, lot 26 on the Princeton tax map pursuant to NJSA 40A 12-3, Wynett Road. Either Ms. Stockton or Mr. DeShield, do you want to explain this? And
Sure. This has been a longstanding issue that dates back to when Mr. Kaiser was township or municipal engineer. At 120 Wynett Road, there is an existing 12-inch clay pipe that runs from inlets on Wynett Road through the private property to outfall at the Stony Brook. Through a title search, we've found that there is no recorded easement for the existing storm sewer pipe, but it does drain the public right-of-way. And so we've been working with the property owner to secure this easement. Our typical easement would be 20 feet wide, but we are asking only for a 15-foot wide easement. We're looking at potentially an 18-inch storm sewer pipe to be installed within that easement. It'll be located along the property line. The current pipe meanders through the property. It goes through the front yard, under lots of trees, and then right next to the swimming pool out to its outfall point. And it actually looks at one point that it may have gone under the garage and was relocated. So this new alignment along the property line will just give us a nice straight shot for the pipe system and really remove a lot of impact to the property.
So will the existing 12-inch pipe just be left in place and disconnected?
Yes, it'll be left in place, disconnected, but we also will put a flowable fill in it. The majority of it is remarkably intact, but there are places where the joints have dropped, which have created little mini sinkholes on the surface. So we will fill the pipe, and then we'll also along above the pipe, we will put in new topsoil and seed and repair any of those places that have sunk.
okay, thank you. Is there a motion to introduce this ordinance?
So moved.
Moved by Ms. Niedergang. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Fraga. Any other further discussion or questions?
Just Maybe it's a speculative question. I'm just trying to figure out how that property was built there to begin with, without any easement, nothing showing when the title search was done. I'm just curious if you have any idea of how that came to be.
I think it was part of a much larger estate, and then over time it got subdivided, and I think it was back in the 50s when these lots
So
were
someone had to
developed.
screw up at a certain point, I believe, right? I'm just wondering.
I think there was less concern about these
Oh.
things back
Yeah.
then.
Okay.
I'll put it that way.
Okay.
It's really not uncommon to find infrastructure in the ground with no easement. It's also, I'm dealing with an issue in another town where we have something that's labeled an easement. There's no indication of who has the easement, what properties it's draining, who's responsible for fixing. I mean, it's sloppy, but especially when you go back in time, it's really not, surprisingly not that unusual.
Okay, we're just not as sloppy now, though, of course.
Pardon?
We're not sloppy now, but someone in the past, some people in the past were
Oh,
sloppy.
yeah, the sloppiness I'm referring to is in an entirely different municipality, not you guys.
Right. Well, I'm saying in this particular case.
Yeah, I mean, you know, as Deanne indicated, you can have subdivisions, and by then people have forgotten there's a pipe in the ground and that you need easements. I mean, it's really not that unusual,
Okay.
unfortunately.
Right.
Thank you. I think it's been moved and seconded. Yes, so please call the roll.
Yes.
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 And the ordinance has been introduced and the public hearing. I'm going to change this. The public hearing will be on November 12th, correct? November 12th, 2019. All right, next we come to our resolutions. The first resolution is 19-327, resolution temporarily authorizing refuse collection between 5 a.m. and 7 p.m. Monday through Saturday. Again, this is temporary for when the Alexander bridges are out. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Cohen, seconded by Mr. Quinn. Any comments or questions on this one? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Resolution passes unanimously. Next is 19-328, resolution to authorize voluntary participation in the financial incentive pilot program, encouraging employees to enroll in state health benefits programs, tiered medical plans.
I'll move it.
It's moved by Ms. Krummeler,
Second.
seconded by Ms. Niedergang. Are there any questions or comments on this resolution? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Resolution passes unanimously. Next is 19-329, resolution setting the 2020 municipal operating and capital budget calendar. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Cohen, seconded by Ms. Krummeler. Any comments or questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Resolution passes unanimously. Next is 19-330, resolution authorizing the extension of the existing contract with IXP Corporation for telecommunication services for the 3 additional years till 2022, and an amount not to exceed $864,840 annually. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Moved by
Second.
Ms. Krummeler and
Second.
seconded by Ms. Niedergang. And are there any comments or questions on this?
I just want to make a comment on this. I know that this was something that was a really tough process for council members who were on board at the time, as I was not. And it seems to have been a success both from the perspective of the police and the perspective of the public, and of course cost saving. So I just want to commend those who were involved for making what were some tough decisions at the time, and just show my appreciation.
Thank you. Your
Thank you.
mentioning that is appreciated too. All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Resolution passes unanimously. Next, we come to the consent agenda, which contains items of a routine nature passed by single vote. Are there any items anybody would like removed from the consent agenda? And if not, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Moved by Ms. Krummeler,
Second.
seconded by Ms. Fraga. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Consent agenda passes unanimously. And is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Cohen, seconded by Ms. Niedergang. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Good night.